I was going to say a couple words here. Part of our conversation was just thinking really about where our students are. And as Tom said, a lot of our students are using these resources all the time. But it also became clear to us, or certainly to me, that students actually do not really understand how these tools work. And so the burden really is on us, to do due diligence there. And I think the simplest thing or maybe the most basic thing to do is to disaggregate information retrieval and generative activity. So we're familiar with information retrieval when you look at up something in a library catalog, but we were familiar with it on Google too when you look at the World Wide Web. One easy thing that I did with my class that just seemed to really hit home with them is to use Google, but just use Google in the web mode. Tell it to be the old Google, and then use Google, with its regular everyday AI mode, and just to pick apart the difference between finding things that exist and making things up from massive analysis of training data. That said, that is an artificial disaggregation of information retrieval and generation. So we need also to talk with our students about how they are entangled now. Obviously, Google will do AI with you if unless you tell it not to. And then because large language models have a kind of closing knowledge date, they're sort of trained and then frozen. What we're seeing now is really elaborate architectures in which the chatbots and other interactive systems are actually searching the web for you. So the two, information retrieval and generation, are getting completely tangled up, but they are two different things. So one of the things we talked about is just kind of how to bone up on this and express it with our students.
Okay, I guess this is back to me. So I had, something else that we talked a lot about from our disciplines was how to formulate, refine research questions, and if maybe with, through, against AI. And in thinking of how to kind of give some thoughts here, I kept coming back to what I've said to my students of whoa and whoa. Like, this is, I feel like a lot of us in the classroom, one thing that we have to kind of deal with personally, but also model for the students is like, whoa, that's amazing. I can't believe it. But also, whoa, hit the brakes, OMG. And this simultaneous way that they work together. And so, what I wanted to very briefly kind of just run through from two different classes, two different exercises that I think kind of model this. So the first one is for incoming MA and PhD students in Middle Eastern Studies, an assignment of how to know what we don't know on kind of developing their projects. And it's trying to get at the process and the product of kind of the paper as well as the digital. And then the second one in a course, Critical Thinking with AI, Knowledge Power in the Middle East, that I taught this last semester, trying to push models and have them fumble and break and see the cracks so that you can have that conversation with students around, whoa and whoa, the confidence that's there, but also the bias and the things that maybe come out from it. So the next slide. So one part of this course working with the students is really, what is your thesis going to be? Where are you at? How do you generate? And this is what it's been for years, working on Miro, which is kind of a Google Docs meets whiteboard. And this has been really generative for them to kind of dump all of their ideas out there. And these two examples here are not meant for you to really see what's going on, but just kind of visually the way that students would process that. And what I faced this last semester was, this is really easy to upload a whole bunch of notes, some, as Tom showed us on Notebook LM, some books, some framing, and it can do this even better in some ways, and it just produces something very different. And so if you go to the next slide, what I'm just presenting here, here's another example someone did very extensive was, next slide. I think how to know what we don't know and asking the students that you could use AI, generative AI in some sense with your lit review with a bunch of PDFs to generate one of these maps for you, but it won't generate your knowledge, your gaps. What about your hunches, your feelings, your experiences? And so I guess this kind of push and pull here is having them still do that assignment, but when and how might they use that or some other materials to generate something that might ideate and help them find other sources, make other connections? And so it is a little bit of a back and forth, a dance here of how you might do that. And so, one practical takeaway is that, you might not have a course on AI, but thinking about asking students where they're generating a research question and making sure that you focus in on that aspect of the personal, their feelings, their gaps, but then also knowing that if it holds hands with some of the generative AI, it could be productive. So that was first example, and I think I'm okay on time for the next one real quick. Um, so this in the critical thinking with AI, the final assignment was one of them was asking students to take a final paper from another course and actually bring in that material, that argument, and try to push a model to the limit where you start to see it break. You see its assumptions, you see the bias, you see where it's not working. And I'm just showing this as an example of, a very old photograph from Damascus. It says Damascus, Palestine. Lots of questions came up in class of that. What did the model see? What did the model see when we uploaded the back description? And I'll just say really quickly, it was interesting. Multiple students made this connection of early photographs doing something that AI is doing today of the bias that's built into how something becomes seen. And we had, a really interesting technological conversation there. But moving on to the next slide, in working with the students, having them bring stuff in, this was something we co-sponsored in our center, the Kurdish Film Festival, and they decided for their promotion to use something that I think with certainty is AI generated, and the types of tropes that exist there. And I'm just bringing this up as an example because I didn't want to show any of the student work without their permission. Um, but these were just kind of certain visual examples. A lot of the students did visual aspects connected with their work of really trying to see this breakdown of the border of when you have a lot of confidence in the model, but then also the way that there were edges and bias at the same time. And so um, again, I think what I'm trying to emphasize through these two examples is you don't need a full class, but even if you were dealing with historical documents, a specific image, thinking through that with the students of that back and forth. And I think that's it from me. Thank you.
I was going to say a couple further words on the subject of reading. As Tom said, because we got off with this academic integrity framing in our discussions about generative AI, I think in a weird way we've been concentrating on student writing, often at the expense of thinking about reading. And for me, at least in the humanities, reading seems like a much bigger problem. Even Brightspace, now that, if you load your course readings into Brightspace, every time your students open a PDF file, it will ask them whether they want a summary. So I think one of the urgent tasks for us in the humanities is to disabuse our students yet again of the notion that we are asking them to do readings so that they can harvest nuggets of information, and to be a little bit more transparent and effective in providing an alternative. So close reading and other things. One thing I did with my students is actually ask them to use those summaries that are generated in Brightspace by generative AI, and actively compare them to the readings themselves. So really kind of aggressively going to evaluate the summaries. What's good about them? There's great things about them. What's bad about them? There are horrible things about them. Stylistically, organizationally, how do they? And we had a very, very good conversation in that direction. And I should say also that it has really sort of changed the way I assign texts and lecture about them, since I'm forced to give lectures sometimes, to again, to try and work against the nugget of information model, which really is anathema to the humanities. So, what is the value added in this reading that cannot be harvested in a summary? And to make sure that that is, the tip of the tip of the spear, if you like, in putting classes together individually, but across the semester as well.